EJ, it's Bob and Tony in our Eastern Connecticut studio. It's great to speak with you again. Happy holidays, EJ.
Hi, EJ.
Happy holidays to you too, guys. How you doing?
We're doing very
fine,
good.
thank you.
It's an honor to speak with you. We spoke a few weeks ago on Thursday Night Tailgate, and we appreciate you coming on the TV site, and I hope things are well with you.
Oh, I'm blessed and favored. Just got a year older this past week, and just working to finish a little bit of recruiting before the holiday break.
There you go. I was going to bring that up, but you did first. Happy birthday, EJ, and again, happy holidays to your family. And we always try to start our shows off, EJ, about your youth. And having been born in North Carolina, growing up in Tennessee, I'd like to get to know how it was back then. Maybe your favorite teams, maybe the favorite sports, or any heroes you followed as a kid?
Well, I guess growing up all over the South, I guess my favorite football team was a cross between the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams, because I love Ray Nitschke as a linebacker, and I love the way that the fearsome force of, which was the D-line of the Los Angeles Rams back in the day, the way that they played. So those were kind of my two favorite teams watching pro football. Of course, I love the Atlanta Braves because they were the closest baseball team to the Nashville area. And then the basketball, I really never really followed basketball until I got into high school and started playing a lot more. And I guess I started following the 76ers with Julius Erving. So, it was just a variety of teams, but, I learned sports because I always watched them play, and I never thought myself would ever be a professional athlete because I always said those guys are way too big, they run too fast, and they hit way too hard. So to my surprise, when I ended up going to the University of Alabama and then having such a career and then going on to the NFL and playing 13 years, I'm still shocked by it, and still waiting word to see what's going on with the College Football Hall of Fame.
And let me, before we get any further, I will give a little background, more background on EJ. Again, 13 seasons, like EJ said, with the Cardinals, Dolphins, Bucks, Seahawks, two-time Pro Bowl selection, a member already of various halls of fame, played 170 games between 81 and 93, credited with 12 interceptions as a linebacker. In 80, as a senior at Bama, a consensus first-team All-American. And Tony, I know Tony wanted to get more involved and talk about your time playing at Alabama. Bear Bryant, first of all, how did you end up at Bama, EJ?
Well, it was kind of, I always used it as part of my recruiting spiel, but it was that at first I didn't really like Alabama because I grew up in the South, and I do remember when the famous words of George Wallace said that a black man would never go to school on this campus. So there was, to me, that was a little bit of a turnoff. But then when Coach Bryant calls your house, you have to understand my mother. My mother is a retired principal, but at that time she was a high school principal.
You weren't getting away with anything.
So, and you know how sometimes the older folks look over their glasses and can talk through their teeth, and you understand every word that they're saying.
Oh yeah.
When Coach Bryant called, and she says, "Well, Coach Bear Bryant is on the phone," and I'm like, "I don't want to talk to him." And she kind of put her teeth together and says, "You're going to talk to this man."
Oh boy.
And I said, "Okay, I'm going to talk to her." So Coach Bryant gets on the phone and says, "EJ, I know you've heard some good things about Alabama and some negative things about Alabama." He says, "But let me guarantee you two things. Two things I will promise you." I said, "What's that, Coach?" He says, "First of all, I guarantee you that you'll get a quality education." And I said, "Okay, Coach." I said, "What's the other thing?" And I'm thinking he's going to say, "I can make you an All-American. I can make you, all SEC, all this, He says, "If you come to Alabama, I'm going to work your tail off." And I paused. I was taken aback by the statement. And I said, "Keep talking, Coach." And the more he talked, the more it made sense about what it was that I was looking for. Because, see, I hated Alabama because I would go to the Vanderbilt games and watch them beat up on Vanderbilt.
Right.
When I watched them play in the Sugar Bowl or the Cotton Bowl or the Orange Bowl, they would beat the team I would want to win. They were always winning. Yeah. So that became part of the criteria. You wanted a team that basically had a good engineering program, which Alabama did. They were one of the tops in the country in that region, and especially in the field of civil engineering. They had a good football program. When I look at the social life, because I based everything in 3 areas: academics, athletics, social life. you're far enough away from home that you are on your own, but you're close enough that if you needed to get home in an emergency, you're 4 hours away from Nashville, Tennessee. And it made a lot of sense. I looked at Georgia Tech and Morehouse on the dual degree program. Of course, I looked at Vanderbilt. I looked at Tennessee State. I looked at the University of Tennessee. Oklahoma was in the mix for a while, Southern Cal. But those two schools were eliminated due to logistics. It didn't make sense to go that far away from home to try to prove that I could play football, because you want your parents to be able to come watch you play every once in a while. But I felt that Vanderbilt was too close, because I had several teammates who played at Vanderbilt. Not to say that they were made a bad decision, but being at home, I might as well have gone to Tennessee State or gone to Vanderbilt. That's like might as well have been going back to Maplewood. So the choice going to Alabama was voted by 4 out of the 5 members of my immediate family. And the only one that didn't vote for Alabama was my sister, who's a Spelman graduate, who thought going to Georgia Tech and Morehouse on a dual degree program, coming with 2 degrees in 5 years, made a lot of sense. And when I look back at it, I said, oh, that might have been a wise proposition. So, but I ended up going to Alabama because the fourth area that I always tell young men about is the spiritual aspect. There was something about going on that campus. There was no football games, no basketball games, no Bama Bells, no hoopla over a football game. It was just a campus. And there was just something that says, this is where you're purposed to go. And I tell every young man that everybody's not purposed to go to Alabama. Not everybody's purposed to go to a Southern Cal. Not everybody's purposed to go to Vanderbilt, because you have to have the academic or the wherewithal to be a part of that and to create a legacy. You know, James Franklin was purposed to be at Vanderbilt when he was for those particular seasons to help turn that program around. And that's what the coach is trying to do now at Vanderbilt when they beat Tennessee. So there are reasons and seasons and purposes, and Alabama just happened to be the right choice for me.
Again, we're on the phone with former Pro Bowl linebacker E.J. Jr. And Tony, you have more on the Bear.
Yeah, and E.J., it's a pleasure to have you tonight, sincerely. I got to ask you about the Bear. I mean, I first saw the Bear many years ago when Joe Namath was signed off of the Alabama campus to play for the Jets. And even when Joe was coming back to work with the Alabama team, to work out when he was a pro, Mr. Bryant treated him like a kid and showed him, you know, the same amount of respect, which was not, you're a football star, you're just a player on this team, and kind of told him what was what. And I mean, what I read about him, what I saw about him, he was a hard drinking, you know, hard cussing, but yet a very reverent and very devoted guy. What was he really like, you know, to you, a player?
Coach Bryant was your father figure away from home. He was a mentor. He was a teacher. He was a philosopher. He was your coach. He taught you things about yourself that you could never really do on your own unless he pushed you to the limit. He made good players great. He made great players exceptional. He made average players good. And he made you look at yourself on a daily basis. He always had a spiritual background in mind, and he was about family. He would take time for each and every one of his players. All his players were important. I don't care if you were a 3-time All-American or if you were a brand-new walk-on. You were part of his family, and he treated you as such. But you had to maintain a level of excellence. You had to maintain that Alabama standard, which was make sure you go to class, make sure you work hard, make sure when you work hard, you give everything that you got and you leave it on the field. And then you go out and do it the next day, because the next day is not promised. And what he was trying to do is get us prepared for a world that basically didn't care about it if you were an Alabama football player. Because when you go into the real world, they aren't going to say, well, you went to the University of Alabama. They want to know, what do you know and can you perform? Can you handle the pressure? And I think that's what he did. When we practiced and when we played under pressure, we were getting ready for corporate America. And that's the mindset that every young man that went to the University of Alabama, and when you look at what Nick Saban is doing, in a way, it's almost the same principle. Those guys play under extreme pressure all the time, and they have to excel when they perform. Well, they'll be prepared for life after football if they continue to not get the big head, think that they're bigger than they are, and continue to have that work ethic that got them to where they are now.
That's some great stuff there, and it explains a lot about a lot of the guys that played for Bryant, Tony, and,
for certain.
And their life lessons learned. And as far as when you're done with the college career, EJ, first round draft pick, number 5, tell us about that day when your name was called by St. Louis.
I had a feeling that I would go to the Cardinals because they brought me there for physicals about 8 times.
Wow.
And there was an incident that happened the year before with one of their players. It was an unfortunate thing. A player named J.V. Kane, who was a tight end.
Oh, yeah.
Good player, second-round draft choice, died from a heart failure. And when I was going through my testing, there was a heart murmur that they weren't sure about. He showed up on their test. Since I've been growing, it's never been existing ever since. So I don't know if it was a precaution or something that just came up. But I knew George Rogers would probably go 1 because I knew that the New Orleans Saints needed a running back.
Yeah.
And this guy named LT, who I played in the East-West Shrine game, I was part of the Kodak All-American team, and I'll give you a quick story about Lawrence Taylor,
Sure.
and I'll get back to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
I went bowling with Lawrence Taylor, Ricky Jackson, Byron Bragg, and Frank Warren. Now, Frank was from Auburn, and all of us were playing in this all-star game, but we went bowling after going to an all-you-can-eat restaurant. They actually gave us a free bill because they wanted us to leave. We ate so much ribs that the rest of the customers weren't going to have any. So they actually covered our bill so we would leave. So we go bowling, and I see Lawrence Taylor pick up a 16-pound ball, roll it down, and I don't think he rolled it. I think he threw it. It bounced twice, hit the lead pin, shattered it. Once it went through those other pins, it knocked that backing down that catches the ball. I thought that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Except the fact that he did it 3 straight times and said, we need to get out of here. and just seeing him up close, I'm like, everybody talks about me. Everybody talks about Hugh Green being the first linebacker. I said, I've seen Hugh. I know Hugh very well. He's a good friend. We still talk to this day. Mm-hmm. But I've not seen anything like Lawrence Taylor. Now, he was a nose tackle out of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. So I knew that he was going to probably be the first linebacker taken because with the position he was working. He had 4 sacks in the East-West Shrine games before he got hurt. That was in the first quarter. Mm-hmm. We ended up with about 9 sacks, 9 or 10 sacks. Ricky Jackson had 4. I had 1. Before, I mean, it was just a beat down of the West team, but I'm like, I've not seen anything like Lawrence Taylor. Mm-hmm. And he went on to prove why he was Lawrence Taylor. You had Freeman McNeil, the running back from UCLA, who went to the New York Jets, and then you had Kenny Easley, to me, one of the all-time great safeties who will never get the credit that he should have because his career ended way too soon. Mm. And then I became based on that, I knew I would go before Hugh Green, but not before Lawrence Taylor. It's just, I didn't know I was going to be an inside backer when I went to the Cardinals. So that was kind of the surprise of the draft.
And I know, Tony, you remember those Cardinal teams well and wanted to talk a little bit about them with EJ.
Thanks, Bob. And EJ, I want to talk to you about Jim Hart. I mean, this is a guy we watched for years. It's like when you're watching him from a distance, he looked like the dictionary definition of an NFL quarterback. You wouldn't define it. You'd sort of have Jim Hart's picture. And what was he like? Was he the team leader that at least we all thought he was?
Jim was not only one of the main leaders, but, I mean, you have to also look at, we had Roger Worley, we had Dan Dierdorf, we had Terry Steed, we had Conrad Dobler. We had a lot of great guys. Tim Kearney, who was the linebacker who took me under his wing and taught me about the NFL. They had a lot of leaders, but they needed things, pieces to continue to help them be great. And when you look at Pat Tilley and O.J. Anderson and Curtis Griff, it was a team that was on the verge of being great. And Jim was going to the end part of his career, always the most memorable guy, very knowledgeable of the game. Those guys would come out to practice, and you're talking about professionalism. It looked like it was just something that they did with ease. They didn't have to work hard at it, but they probably did. You just didn't know that they were working hard because they made it look so simple. But I remember going against Dan Deerdorf, coming into camp late, and he says, "Rook, welcome to the NFL." And I'm going to tell you a story about Dan. Now, we're talking about back in the days when you didn't think NFL players smoked. Now, I'm not trying to ruin their reputation.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm coming into the locker room. They got cigarette holders by each of the lockers. Most of the offensive linemen are smoking. I said, "NFL players don't smoke?" He says, "I don't know what they've been telling you, Rook, but this is just a way of life." So we get to Seattle for training camp. Mm-hmm. Theodore is lifting the stack. Now, the stack on this particular Nautilus machine is probably about 450 pounds, and he's sitting on a chair with a cigarette in his mouth, pressing this with ease. And he extends it, holds it with one hand. He says, "Here, Rook, hold my cigarette."
Oh, my
Does
God.
it about 15 more times. He says, "Okay, I'm done." Take the cigarette, and I'm like, this man is not normal.
Oh, that's a great story.
That's a great story.
It's a different era, EJ. It truly is.
It's a lot different there. I mean, but those guys, the one thing that I look at, they always took us under the wings. They told us about the game. Yes, were they threatened by our positions and we were trying to take their job? Yes. But to them, winning mattered. It says, if you're going to help us win, then we need to teach you everything we know. Mm-hmm. Because the rule was they didn't want you to get them killed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they took you under the wings. You did what they did. You went to where they went. You drunk what they drunk. And you emulated everything that they did. And I learned a lot in my first 2 years under those guys. And basically, they were grooming me to be a leader in the NFL, and I didn't know that it was going to happen so fast because, you know, time is fleeting. Deerdorf was with me 3 years. Jim Hart basically got replaced by Neil Lomax near towards the end of the season because he was mentoring Neil, and I always called Neil the 1B draft choice and not the second-round draft choice. And you can see the knowledge. Neil was just a little more mobile than Jim, and Jim had taken beatings over the years.
Sure.
You still had guys like Pat Tilley, and then we moved Roy Green from strong safety to wide receiver, and he became a great wide receiver. Just got inducted into the Cardinals Ring of Honor, and I got a chance to go out to Arizona last weekend and watch the game between the Redskins, and just to see guys I hadn't seen before, like Stump Mitchell is the running back coach, and guys like Bill Kayak, who used to be on the staff, and see what I call little Michael Bidwell, all grown up and being the president of the club. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I felt like I was at home, and I think Michael has done a great job, not his father, Bill, but it's a different era now. They're doing things to bring the older guys back into the fold, to create that connection between St. Louis and Phoenix, and all that history to maintain itself, because you have to go understand where you came from before you can go into the future of knowing where you're going. So those guys have taught us so much, and I'm hoping that this new generation is doing the same, because I tried to pass down the same things when I had Freddie Joe Nunn and Anthony Bell and Nico Noga. Yeah. When I was playing, and when I got to the Dolphins, I had Brian Cox working with John Offerdahl. Barry Krause, who was a teammate of mine with the Cardinals, to play with Hugh Green. It was fun. And then going to the Seahawks and kind of being mentor to those young linebackers, Rufus Porter, Rod Stevens, and Terry Wooden. That sparked me into wanting to get into coaching or NFL administration. And that's the thing that still drives me. I've always wanted to give back from the days of being under Coach Bryan and Ken Donahue and Sylvester Croom, to playing in the league, to now trying to give back to these young guys now.
And EJ, you were able to, you mentioned the time in Miami, a few years under Shula. I remember Oliver Dottie was the defensive coordinator there. I mean, again, this was not the Miami teams of the 70s, but you did have that 12-win season. You went to the playoffs. But how about the overall experience in Miami and Shula toward the end of his career?
Well, you go from Bear Bryant, and then you get Jim Hamilton, and then Gene Stallings. Everybody forgets about Gene Stallings. True. When I was with the Cardinals. Right. To Don Shula, it's almost like dealing with the old man twice. And Shula was to me the NFL epitome of coaching, because he was very tough, knew the game, wanted you to know the game. Your football IQ was going to go up because of the way that he wanted everything to be perfection. Had Oliver Dottie as our D coordinator, had George Hill, who was a great coordinator in his own right as our linebacker coach. Mel Phillips. You had all these great guys. Tony Nathan was a coach then, and Dwight Stevenson had been hurt. But then I learned pass rushing skills from Mean Joe Green.
Boy.
So, there were some great coaches. We did some good things. We never could get past Buffalo. And that was always going to be that thorn in the side. That period of time trying to compete with the Buffalo Bills when they had Bruce Smith and Cornelius Bennett and Jim Kelly and the K-Gun offense and Thurman Thomas. That was the one obstacle that will always keep us from getting to the AFC Championship, because we had to always go through Buffalo, and that was not going to be a fun task. But constantly learning from great guys like Martin Clayton and Duper, and playing with Crash Jensen, and of course Dan Marino, the epitome of being a Hall of Famer. It was a lot of fun, and sometimes you wish you could rewind the clock and say, if we could have only done this, maybe we would have been in the Super Bowl. So I think Dan learned a lot, because after that first year of going to the Super Bowl and losing to the 49ers, and saying, okay, well, it's going to be easy to go the next time. And they never did have the defense to accommodate what he was trying to do to get there. I think sometimes he would trade some of the honor just to have a chance to play in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. And again, as EJ said, Tony, 1990, Dolphins were 12-4, and eventually lost to Buffalo in the playoffs. But a couple very talented teams that year. We have a couple more minutes with EJ. Tony.
And EJ, all your years in football, was it a hard time when you left football, and was it rough to be adjusted?
I don't think so. I think because the easier adjustment was for the older guys who played the game earlier, because our salaries weren't the $1 million contracts that these guys are getting now. I worked as a drug and alcohol therapist. I got in trouble with the NFL for my drug abuse. And one of the things that I became during the off season, because it was one of the choices I had during the off season, was being a drug and alcohol counselor. Because my background is in civil engineering and public relations. I had a job that I could do public relations. There was a job for me that I could do in engineering part-time during the off-season. But there was this job with the care unit in St. Louis that I took on, and I became a drug and alcohol therapist. So every off-season, I served as a drug and alcohol therapist working with adolescents. And I worked with that program for 6 years in the Highland Adolescent Center over at St. Thomas Hospital in St. Louis, until we moved to Arizona. Then I worked with the care unit in Arizona, and then I worked with the care unit in Coral Springs. So my transition, I was already transitioning, because that's what you did in the off season. My base salary in the earlier part of my years was $70,000. By the time I ended my career, I was making probably $900,000, anywhere from $500,000 to $900,000. But I knew that when you get through playing this game, you have to get a real job, and so the transition was already set in place. So Dear Lord had his restaurant. I did radio talk shows with OJ. We used to do the OJ and EJ show, so I could have gone into broadcasting. Yeah. And my wife to this day still wonders, why didn't I go into television broadcast? I would have been great. I said, because I love teaching the game and not talking about the game. And I think that's one of the things that separates you from those guys. There are guys who can talk about it and explain it, but then there are guys who want to have hands-on, and I think that's one of the things that always drove me in the past. And so it was an easier transition once I got through the game. I actually got a chance to be a coach on the Seattle Seahawks staff. Yep. Because when I tore up my knee, tried to work to get back to play in 1994, Coach Flores and Rusty Tillman, Rusty Tillman was our D coordinator, and Tom Flores was the head coach. He said, have you ever thought about coaching? And I said, I had never really looked at it. He says, well, that's what you've been doing since you got here, because you've been teaching my young linebackers what they need to do, and you've always been a coach on the field. You ought to think about it. Well, that's what I started to pursue. Unfortunately, our staff was fired after that year. I didn't really know how to network to get on anybody else's staff, so went back and did some things, ended up being director of player development programs with the Miami Dolphins, did that for a couple of years. And then I became an executive director of youth programs. I got away from football altogether. But there's always that burning desire to teach the game. So in 2003, I did an internship with the Minnesota Vikings. I went back and did another internship, coached over in NFL Europe with the Ryan Fire, and did an internship with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And after that, I started coaching college football. So there's possibilities of me maybe getting my foot back in the door in the NFL if I'm not considered too old to continue to teach this game. But I'm enjoying what I do at Delaware State as long as God has me there, unless He moves me up to something else.
Well, you're not too old, EJ, because you're only like a year older than me, so you're not too old. Let's get that straight, okay? And your resume is beyond impressive, and just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, our time is basically up, and we just scratched the surface. I'm sure we'll be talking again on the Thursday night tailgate side. You're always welcome here. We want to thank you so much for your cooperation and willingness to appear. It's been such an honor. And again, we want to just wish you happy holidays. Please keep in touch, EJ. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much, EJ. It's been fun.
Yeah, man, it's always a good time. It's always a lot of fun. And God bless you and happy holidays. Blessings.
Take care. We'll talk
soon.
soon. Bye-bye now.
Much.
Bye-bye.
Good night.